What if the one drink you have been praising every single morning as a pillar of your healthy lifestyle is quietly doing something to your intestinal cells that you would never accept if anyone warned you in plain language? Not a soda, not alcohol, not a processed shake full of artificial colors, a juice that appears on every wellness list, every morning routine video, every nutritionist recommendation you have ever seen, a juice that sits in your refrigerator right now, probably with an organic label and a green cap. And that science has been connecting to a specific and deeply alarming change in the cells lining your colon. I am not here to frighten you into panic. I'm here to tell you what I tell patients in my practice when they finally understand what has been happening inside them for years without a single symptom to warn them. And today, I need you to hear it clearly. Let us start with what your intestine is actually doing every single day, because most people have no idea how sophisticated and how vulnerable that environment really is. The lining of your colon is not a passive tube. It is a living, breathing wall made of billions of cells that renew themselves constantly, that communicate with your immune system, that regulate inflammation, and that work around the clock to separate what your body needs from what it needs to eliminate. That wall is also your first line of defense against abnormal cell growth. It depends on three things to do its job correctly. It needs proper circulation, meaning enough blood flow to deliver oxygen and nutrients to each individual cell. It needs a balanced microbial environment, meaning the right bacteria working in your gut to produce the compounds that keep those cells healthy and genetically stable. And it needs controlled glucose metabolism, meaning that the fuel arriving to those cells comes in a slow, manageable stream rather than a sudden flood that overwhelms their ability to process it cleanly. When any one of those three things breaks down, the cellular environment in your colon changes. The cells begin to experience what researchers describe as oxidative stress. Their DNA becomes more vulnerable to copying errors during replication. And over time, those copying errors accumulate in ways that do not feel like anything at all, not a cramp, not a pain, not a visible sign, until the damage has compounded enough to become something that nobody wants to hear named in a doctor's office. Now here is where the juice comes in. And I want you to stay with me through the next section, because what I'm about to describe connects directly to something I will show you later in this video, a protocol called the cellular hunger protocol that works through a biological mechanism most people have never heard of, and that addresses this kind of silent cellular damage at its root rather than at its surface. What I will show you about that protocol changed the way I counsel patients who come to me at risk, and you need to understand the full picture before I explain how it works. But first, the juice. For decades, a particular category of fruit juice has been marketed as one of the most antioxidant-rich beverages available to the average person. The marketing is not entirely wrong. The fruit itself, in its whole form, contains genuinely beneficial compounds, fiber, phytonutrients, and a range of vitamins that do real work inside the human body when consumed the right way. The problem is not the fruit. The problem is what happens when you strip away the fiber, concentrate the liquid, and deliver it in a glass that most people drink in under 3 minutes on an empty stomach, often alongside other high carbohydrate foods. What arrives in your intestinal lining at that moment is a rapid surge of fructose, not glucose, which your cells are relatively well equipped to handle in moderate amounts. Fructose. And fructose, unlike glucose, is almost entirely processed by the liver. But when the liver is saturated, as it frequently is in adults consuming a modern diet, excess fructose enters an alternative metabolic pathway. It drives the production of something called uric acid, which in high concentrations creates an inflammatory signal that reaches the gut wall directly. At the same time, the sudden fructose surge disrupts the microbial balance in the colon. Specific strains of bacteria that produce protective short-chain fatty acids, the compounds that literally feed the cells lining your colon and keep their DNA replication stable, these bacteria begin to decline in relative population. The bacteria that thrive on fructose tend to be those that produce byproducts that increase permeability in the intestinal wall. And a permeable intestinal wall is a colon that is no longer adequately defending itself. Let me stop for a moment and ask you something. Has anyone in your family been told that they have polyps? A first-degree relative? A parent? A sibling? Or perhaps you have had a colonoscopy that found something that was removed and the doctor said it was benign, but that you should come back in 3 years instead of 10? If the answer to either of those is yes, what I am telling you right now is directly relevant to your life. Leave a comment below and let me know your situation. You are not alone in this, and understanding the mechanism is the first step toward interrupting it. Now I want to tell you about someone who came to my practice not as a diagnosed patient, but as someone who considered themselves a model of health consciousness. This was a woman in her late 60s, retired, active, no medications, no chronic diagnoses. She had been doing everything right by every conventional standard she knew. Daily walks, no alcohol, minimal processed food, and every single morning without exception, a large glass of cold-pressed juice. Mixed varieties, always organic, always labeled as detoxifying or cleansing. She drank it for years because every health source she trusted told her it was one of the best things she could do for her body. She came to see me not because of her gut. She came because of fatigue that she could not explain, a kind of deep tiredness that rest did not resolve. But during our conversation, she mentioned that her last colonoscopy had shown 2 small polyps that had not been there 3 years earlier. Her gastroenterologist had removed them, reassured her, and told her to return in 5 years. She was not alarmed. I was. When I reviewed her dietary habits in detail, the juice was not the only factor, but it was a consistent and daily accelerant of exactly the kind of intestinal environment that promotes abnormal cell behavior. Chronic low-level fructose overload, progressive disruption of her gut microbiome, gradual elevation of intestinal inflammation, markers that no one had thought to measure, and underneath all of it, a process happening at the cellular level that conventional monitoring does not catch until it has already advanced. I explained to her that the problem was not a single meal or a single week of poor choices. The problem was a pattern that had been quietly aging her intestinal cells faster than the rest of her body was aging. Her intestinal lining contained what the emerging field of cellular biology now refers to as senescent cells, cells that have stopped functioning correctly and stopped dying on schedule. Cells that have essentially forgotten how to complete their own life cycle and instead release inflammatory compounds that slowly poison the cells around them. These are sometimes called zombie cells, and in a colon wall that has been chronically inflamed through fructose-driven dysbiosis and oxidative stress, these zombie cells accumulate faster than the body can clear them. This is where I need to say something clearly so that the full picture comes into focus. Polyp formation is not a sudden event. It is a slow accumulation of cellular errors in an environment that has been allowed to become chronically inflammatory. Removing the polyp does not address the environment. It is like pulling a weed from soil that is growing more weeds every season. The ground itself has to change, and that is something that most standard follow-up protocols do not adequately address. If you are finding this explanation valuable, I would encourage you to subscribe to this channel right now and turn on your notifications. The content I share here goes deeper than anything you will find in a waiting room pamphlet, and the next several videos build directly on what I am explaining today. Do it now so you do not lose this thread. Let us go deeper into what is actually happening inside those cells, because this is where the story becomes extraordinary rather than simply frightening. Your body has a built-in cellular cleaning system. It has existed for as long as your species has existed, shaped by millions of years of conditions in which humans were not eating every 3 hours, and certainly not beginning every morning with a glass of concentrated fructose. This system is called autophagy. In plain language, it means self-eating. And before you react to that phrase, understand what it actually means. Autophagy is the process by which your cells identify damaged components, dysfunctional proteins, old cellular debris, and yes, those zombie cells I described, and they break them down from the inside, using the material as fuel for the repair and regeneration of healthy tissue. It is not destructive. It is restorative in the most fundamental biological sense. It is your body's own factory for cellular renewal. Research across multiple decades has established that autophagy declines with age, that chronic high glucose and high fructose diets suppress it significantly, and that the accumulation of senescent cells in tissues like the colon is in large part a consequence of autophagy becoming too sluggish to keep pace with the rate of cellular damage. When your colon wall cannot clear its zombie cells efficiently, the inflammatory environment those cells create becomes self-sustaining. And a self-sustaining inflammatory environment in the colon is precisely the biological soil in which abnormal cell growth takes root. This is not a fringe theory. This is among the most actively studied areas in oncology and cellular biology right now. The relationship between impaired autophagy, zombie cell accumulation, and colon cancer risk is a research priority across major institutions worldwide. The mechanism is understood, the pathway is measurable, and what is remarkable is that autophagy can be reactivated deliberately, not through pharmaceutical intervention, not through a prescription, through specific biological triggers that exist in ordinary foods that you can access in any kitchen without spending anything beyond what you already spend on groceries. And now I want to tell you what those triggers are and how they work together in a specific sequence, because sequence matters here as much as the ingredients themselves. The morning metabolic window, the 2 to 3 hours after waking before the body has been given a significant glucose load, is when cellular cleanup processes are naturally most primed. During sleep, your digestive burden drops, cortisol begins to rise to prepare you for the day, and your cells are already initiating low-level autophagy. The mistake that most people make in that window is not just the fructose juice. It is delivering a concentrated carbohydrate signal to a biological system that is in the middle of cleaning itself. It is like turning off the vacuum cleaner halfway through the house and throwing dirt on the floor at the same time. What you do in that morning window, specifically in the first 45 to 90 minutes after waking, either accelerates the cellular cleanup that began overnight or completely shuts it down. Most people without knowing it, shut it down every single morning before they have even thought about their day. Tell me, does your morning routine include coffee? Does it include something eaten within the first 30 minutes of waking? I ask because I genuinely want to understand how many of you reading this right now are starting your day in a way that is suppressing the very biological process that protects your colon. Drop a note in the comments and describe your first 30 minutes after waking. I read them. The patterns I see in those comments help me know exactly what to address next. Now, there is a specific combination of 4 morning activators, each one found in an ordinary kitchen, that when taken in the correct sequence during that metabolic window, does something that isolated interventions cannot do alone. They trigger autophagy in a targeted way, not just a gentle nudge toward cellular cleanup, but a full biological shift into what can be described as cellular hunger mode. The body, receiving these signals in sequence, interprets the environment as one that requires it to feed on its own damaged material. It begins hunting zombie cells. It begins dismantling the inflammatory debris that has been accumulating in the intestinal wall. It begins using that debris as fuel for the regeneration of healthy, functionally normal cells. This is the mechanism behind the cellular hunger protocol. It is not a supplement, it is not a medication, it is a structured morning activation sequence built on 4 specific compounds that each contribute a distinct signal to the autophagy cascade. 1 prepares the liver to manage fructose and other metabolic byproducts efficiently. 1 activates the mitochondrial stress response that initiates zombie cell identification. 1 suppresses the signaling pathway that tells the body it has adequate cellular resources and therefore does not need to clean house. And 1 extends the cellular hunger window so that the cleanup process continues for a meaningful duration rather than being interrupted the moment digestion resumes. Together, across a 30-day cycle, these 4 activators progressively shift the cellular environment of the intestinal lining from one dominated by inflammatory senescent cells to one in which healthy cell turnover is restored. Patients who complete the cycle consistently report something they describe not as a dramatic event, but as a gradual return. Energy that had been declining for years without a clear reason begins to stabilize. Joint stiffness that they had accepted as irreversible begins to ease. Digestive discomfort, bloating, irregular patterns, those quiet chronic complaints that everyone has but that nobody connects to colon inflammation, those begin to resolve in ways that dietary changes alone had never achieved, because this is the gap that conventional approaches miss. Telling someone to eat less sugar and more fiber is not wrong advice. It is genuinely useful, but it addresses the input to a system that has already been structurally altered by years of accumulated cellular damage. It is adjusting the fuel without repairing the engine. The cellular hunger protocol does not just adjust the fuel, it repairs the engine at the cellular level using the body's own biological machinery in the way that machinery was designed to be used before modern eating patterns suppressed it. Now, I want to speak to you honestly about something that I do not often see acknowledged in the health content that circulates widely. The colon is a silent organ. It does not signal distress early. It accumulates damage across years and decades without generating pain, without producing a visible symptom, without changing anything in how you feel from day to day, until the damage has reached a threshold that requires medical intervention. By the time symptoms appear, the cellular environment has been dysregulated for a very long time. This is not something to be afraid of. It is something to understand, because understanding it means recognizing that the window for intervention is not when symptoms arrive. The window is now, today, before anything becomes visible. That is when cellular level restoration is most effective and most complete. I have directed patients to the cellular hunger protocol across a range of risk profiles, from people with a confirmed family history of colorectal disease to people who, like the woman I described earlier, simply want to interrupt a pattern before it compounds further. What I observe consistently is that the restoration of autophagy function does not produce a single dramatic breakthrough. It produces a series of quiet, cumulative improvements that begin in the first 2 weeks and accelerate through the full 30 days. The cellular environment does not change overnight, but over a 30-day cycle, the shift is measurable in ways that patients can feel and that their follow-up evaluations can confirm. I need to be direct with you about something regarding access. The cellular hunger protocol is not distributed through commercial retail channels. It is not something you will find by searching a general marketplace. The reason is specific and worth understanding. The protocol requires a level of personalized implementation guidance that cannot be adequately provided through a generic purchase experience. The team behind the protocol works with a limited active group at any given time to ensure that the morning activation sequence is being followed correctly, that the 30-day cycle is calibrated to the individual's starting metabolic state, and that questions and adjustments can be addressed in real time. This is not marketing language. It is a structural reality of how this protocol functions. I have seen what happens when someone encounters a method like this and waits. Not because they are not concerned, not because they do not understand the risk, but because they assume the window for getting started will remain open indefinitely. In more cases than I wish to recount, that delay means that the next colonoscopy finds something the previous one did not. It means that the conversation in the doctor's office shifts from prevention to management. Once the cellular environment has deteriorated to the point of confirmed pathology, the options narrow significantly. The time to activate autophagy restoration is during the years before that conversation happens. That time, for most people watching this right now, is still available, but it requires a decision today, not a revisit next month. The single step I'm asking you to take is to go to the pinned comment below this video. The link there takes you directly to the full information about the cellular hunger protocol, including the explanation of each of the 4 morning activators, the 30-day cycle structure, and the current availability for new participants. Read it fully, understand the mechanism, and then make a decision based on what you now know about what is happening in your intestinal cells every day that nothing on the outside will warn you about. The pinned comment is below. Go there now.